It was 17 years ago, 1991. I was in East Timor with my colleague, Alan Nairn. He was doing a piece for The New Yorker. I was doing a documentary for Pacifica about one of the worst slaughters of the 20th century, the Indonesian occupation of Timor. It had been going on at that point for about 17 years. A young man urged us to come to his backyard. And when we got there, wondering what we would see, he dug in the dirt about a foot down, and he pulled out a piece of paper. It was a Xerox of an article about a non-binding resolution in the U.S. Congress that was calling for an end to the arming of the Indonesian regime as it occupied East Timor. It was that important to him. He risked being torn away in the middle of the night by the U.S.-armed Indonesian soldiers. He risked his family being taken, but he had buried this because information is so important. A few days later, on November 12, 1991, thousands of peaceful Timorese marched to the cemetery to honor the young people who had died. A third of the population had been wiped out. As we were covering them and saying, "Why are you willing to risk your lives?" the Indonesian soldiers marched up 12 to 14 abreast. In uniform, in unison, they marched. The people had marched to a cemetery. There were the dead of too many young people. And they had unfurled banners on bed sheets. One side would be held by a woman in traditional Timorese garb, the other by a girl in a Catholic school uniform. It would say, "Why the Indonesian military shoot our church?" It would appeal to then President George H.W. Bush, appeal to the United Nations to do something. We walked to the front of the crowd. I put my headphones on, my microphone out like a flag. Alan Nairn put the camera above his head. We knew that the Indonesian military had tried to commit many massacres in the past, had committed massacres in the past, but never in front of journalists. Maybe we could head off this attack just by being who we were, though we'd always hidden our equipment because people caught talking to journalists could be ripped away in the middle of the night, could be imprisoned or killed. This time we wanted to make clear to the soldiers who we were. The soldiers marched up. They swept past us, and they opened fire on the crowd, gunning people down from right to left. A group of soldiers surrounded us. They threw me to the ground. They shook my microphone in my face as if to say, "This is what we don't want." Alan took a photograph of them opening fire on the crowd. He threw himself on top of me to protect me from further injury. And then the Indonesian soldiers took their US M16s, slammed them against his skull until they fractured it. We were laying on the ground, Alan covered in blood. They were killing everyone around us. The soldiers put the guns to our head in firing squad fashion. And they screamed two things. They screamed politique, because they said it was political for us to be there, to witness this. But that is our job as journalists, whether in Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon. It is to go to where the silence is. The U.S. press had not mentioned the words East Timor in the major nightly newscasts in that 17 years from 75, when the Indonesian soldiers invaded 90% of the weapons from the United States, to 1991. ABC, NBC, CBS had not mentioned Timor. So as we lay on the ground and they shouted politique and also Australia, demanding to know if we were from Australia, we knew why they wanted to know this. Because 17 years before, in the lead up to the invasion, there were 5 Australian-based journalists who were covering the lead up to the invasion. And they lined them up against a house in a place called Ballybo, and they executed the journalists. One last one, Roger East, was reporting from the World in 75 when the Indonesian military invaded, a day after the invasion, December 8th, from a radio station in Dili, the capital of East Timor. Radio stations are so important all over the world. In Haiti, when there is a coup, they first ransack the radio stations that play musique engagée, engaged music. When Subcomandante Marcos in Chiapas first emerged from the jungle with the Zapatistas, we were there. And he held a news conference first for the Mexican radio reporters only. I don't know how I snuck in, but radio was relevant then. And he said the reason he limited it to radio reporters is because they are the way to get out the greatest information to the greatest number of people. Because even the poorest areas, you might have one radio for an entire village, and people are hungry for information and they will listen. It can't be as easily manipulated as the television, he said. But back in Timor, Roger East, this reporter reporting for The World the day after the invasion in '75, the Indonesian military dragged him through the streets to the harbor where so many thousands of Timorese had been shot into the harbor. And he just shouted, "I'm from Australia." They shot him into it as well. So as we lay on the ground, Alan covered in blood, and they shouted, "Australia, Australia." They wanted to know where we were from. We knew we had to be clear we were not from Australia, because the Australian government hardly protested the killing of their journalists. We believe because years later Australia and Indonesia would sign the Timor Gap Treaty, dividing up Timor's oil between Australia and Indonesia. Oil is the source of so much pain in the world. So we shouted back, "No, we're from America." They'd stripped us now of everything, laying in the ground. I only had left my passport. I threw it at them. They'd kick me in the stomach. When I get my breath back, I'd say, "America, America," to make clear to these soldiers who we were. Finally, they turned the guns from our heads. We believe because we were from the same country their weapons were from. They would have to pay a price for killing us that they'd never had to pay for killing the Timorese, and they moved on. We were able to get out of the country that day. They killed more than 270 Timorese on that day, not one of the largest massacres in East Timor. And when we came back to this country and held a news conference, we knew that the way to stop the killing was simply to get information out. It was the power of that information that would pressure the Indonesian government from outside. When the doctors and nurses saw us when we were first brought to a hospital in Timor, before we got out, they started to cry. And I think it's because of what we represent, not only to the people of Timor, not only Alan and me, but all of us. What we represent as American journalists, as American media workers, as American citizens and not citizens, but people who are living in this country, we represent two things, the sword and the shield. The sword, because all too often the U.S. government either arms human rights abusing regimes like Indonesia or uses the weapons themselves like in Iraq. But the American people they see as the shield. That we are the only ones that can turn back those guns that our government is using or sending to others. And how important it was to get information out around the world. Ultimately, the people of East Timor won their freedom. They voted for independence at an unbelievably high price. In May 2002, I went back with them to East Timor to celebrate their independence, the newest nation in the world. And as they saw their founding president stand up and unfurl the flag of the Democratic Republic of East Timor, it was May 20th, 2002. They stood in a sandy plain, about 100,000 of them outside Dili, the capital. You could see the fireworks, the light of the fireworks in their tear-stained faces. They had won. This nation of survivors had prevailed, but an unacceptably high price. But they thank people all over the world, from particularly the most powerful countries on earth, for demanding their countries stop supporting human rights abusing regimes. And it is a lesson to all of us. Whether we are journalists or librarians, bookstore owners, doctors, nurses, students, artists, employed or unemployed, we have a decision to make every day. And that is whether we want to represent the sword or the shield. And there is no more important time to weigh that decision than today. In this absolutely critical year, this election year of 2008. What an important role you play. What an important position everyone in this country occupies. Years ago, I interviewed a woman from Guyana about globalization. At the end of the interview, we were moving her out to move in people on the U.S. elections, and she wouldn't get up. And, you know, the music is playing. We've got 60 seconds. And if you wonder why on Democracy Now! We extend that music sometimes we just love it, you know, like when Sarah Thompson sings. And I know Sarah Thompson is in town today. What a wonderful musician. And sometimes it's because someone trips over the microphone, or in this case, this woman wouldn't leave. And I said, why? We're done with this segment. We're moving on to the U.S. elections. And she said, I'll be a participant in this discussion. And I said, why? You're from Guyana. We're talking about the U.S. elections. And she said, because I believe everyone in the world should get to vote for President of the United States. And it is such an important point. Well, she doesn't, but you do. And whoever you decide to support, it is critical you act, and that we as journalists and media workers get as much information as we possibly can out. The media are the most powerful institutions on earth, more powerful than any bomb, more powerful than any missile, and the Pentagon's deployed the media, and we have to take it back. It's not good for the generals. It's not good for the low-level soldiers. They can't have these debates on military bases about issues of war and peace, life and death. They rely on us in civilian society to have these critical discussions. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day. Anything less than that is a disservice to the servicemen and women of this country who are sent to kill or be killed. Anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. It is so important. We take our role seriously. There's a reason why our profession is the only one explicitly protected by the U.S. Constitution. Because journalists are supposed to be the check and balance on power, holding those in power accountable. What could be more important this year? And if you don't care at the national level, if you don't feel the candidates fully represent your point of view, get involved at the lowest level. Get involved in your city council, your town meeting, elections for library board. Support people, your friends, people in the community that you believe in, or run yourself. I was just in Nevada City, walked into Java John's. I was there, by the way, for the memorial service of the great troubadour, railroad tramp, storyteller, folk musician, Utah Phillips. What an amazing man he was. Hard to believe we lost him last week at the age of 73 to congestive heart failure. I was just thinking of Gore Vidal, who talks about the United States of amnesia. Well, Utah Phillips fought that every day of his life with his long memory. And that is what we must provide a forum for in this country, history. That's what we can also do. Looking back at the grassroots movements that have brought us to where we are, and the grassroots movements that you are a part of, and so many others are, that get whited out of the mainstream media. How are young people to understand the mechanism of social change, to understand they don't have to do it alone, that they are part of a great movement and movements? My brother David and I have written Standing Up to the Madness, about ordinary people in this country who don't go looking for trouble, but when trouble comes to them, they stand up. And we begin with Rosa Parks. The corporate media got it wrong with her. Right, this woman who was so remarkable, December 1st, 55. Everyone knows the story. You think, how did they get it wrong on that? We do know that story. They didn't white it out. Well, they talk about Rosa Parks, who sat on the bus to lead the Montgomery bus boycott, as a tired seamstress who was no troublemaker. She was a troublemaker, a first-class troublemaker. This was a woman who sat down on the bus, knew exactly what she was doing. She was the local secretary of the NAACP. She worked under Edie Nixon. He came out of radical labor politics. He was the president. And together they've been challenging the racist segregation laws for years. She'd sat down on the bus before, but this was a magic moment. And those magic moments are what is key. You don't know when they'll happen, these turning points in history. But when they happen, if you've helped lay the foundation, no matter how frustrating or long it seems to be to take, when you are part of laying that foundation, you hope to determine the course of history. But Rosa didn't come out of nowhere. She had trained at the Highlander Center, black and white together, challenging the segregation laws. She knew exactly what she was doing. And a few days later, when she went to court, the Montgomery Improvement Association had their mass meeting. They chose as their leader to lead the Montgomery bus boycott a young minister who had just moved into town. He was the Dr. Martin Luther King. Yes, Rosa Parks helped to launch Dr. Martin Luther King, and we have to remember and know these stories, repeat them now, cover the movements today, and then it will not be as intimidating for young people and old to think, I can make a difference because I am part of something much greater than myself. Margaret Mead, of course, the famous line, never doubt for a moment that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I just want to end with the White Rose Collective. I saw Lori Arbiter in the audience, who is one of those artists against the war who put out those T-shirts that have now proliferated, thousands and thousands of them in every language. We will not be silent. The black T-shirt with the white lettering, and under it in Arabic or in Hebrew or in Spanish or in French, and now the original German where it came from. Yes, back in World War II, and this shows the power of our job this year in every field you are in, whether you're in public access TV or community radio or working online, or whether you're in public radio, Pacifica Radio, Free Speech TV, Link TV, building independent media to get the word out. That line comes from the White Rose Collective of World War II, Hans and Sophie Scholl, brother and sister, who, together with their professor, in the face of the Nazi atrocity in Germany, they weren't Jewish, they were German Christians, but thought, what can we do? They decided to put out a series of pamphlets. They thought, if we can get out information about what's happening, at least the Germans will never be able to say, we didn't know. As they put out 6 pamphlets, on the 4th, the cover, it said, we will not be silent. Hans and Sophie and their professor were captured, they were charged, they were tried, and they were convicted by the Nazis. Ultimately, they were beheaded. But that philosophy, that motto, should be the Hippocratic oath of the media today. We will not be silent. Democracy Now! And now, it is my greatest honor to introduce the next speaker, who I feel like I've been traveling with for the last 2 months. We've been on a many-city tour around this country, broadcasting Democracy Now! And talking about standing up to the madness. And every time I get in the plane, when in the past it would have been, oh my God, another flight, it's thank God, a delay. Oh my gosh, we'll have to stay overnight. It means I get to spend more time with the great writer, Louise Erdrich, because I have been reading her latest book, The Plague of Doves. Louise Erdrich, the remarkable Minneapolis-based writer, author of 12 novels, as well as volumes of poetry, children's books, as well as a memoir of early motherhood. Her novel, Love Medicine, won the National Book Critics Circle Award, The Lost Report on the Miracles, the last report on the miracles at Little No Horse was a finalist for the National Book Award. Louise Erdrich is a remarkable woman. She also is the owner of a local independent bookstore. And independent bookstores all over this country are a critical part of the independent media landscape. And I hope you frequent yours. I hope after this session You'll go down to the exhibition area where her bookstore, Birch Bark Books, is providing all of the books of the authors here. Independent bookstores, a critical sanctuary of dissent. Louise Erdrich runs the bookstore with her daughter Persia and her other family members, the remarkable writer and Native American author, artist, Louise Erdrich.